Since coming into office in January, the Trump administration has been aggressively advancing some business interests of Elon Musk, the world's richest man, according to an independent news organization, ProPublica. The organization says the U.S. State Department has on a number of occasions stepped in on behalf of Starlink, a satellite internet company owned by Musk in several African countries. According to Starlink, the satellite provider is now operating in 18 out of 54 African countries, including Nigeria, Botswana and Kenya. An expert says advancing American business interests outside the U.S. ties in with Trump's America First policy.
From Donald Trump's first term, we saw how he has very proactively been rooting for promoting American business and economic interests across the world, even during his first term. So I think it's just continuing with that trend. But of course, Elon Musk being very close to Donald Trump, it raises questions around cronyism or crony capitalism.
That is because in instances where African countries have resisted or delayed licensing Starlink, they've been met with veiled threats.
First of all, funding will be cut to those particular countries. It has happened in South Africa. Another thing is that they are going to receive very short shrift in the United States. They will be pilloried, for example, for their human rights violations and any other excuse at all that Donald Trump might actually find.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa experienced this firsthand on a visit to the White House last week. The country had delayed licensing Starlink, citing regulatory compliance. Following the White House visit, the country is now looking to relax conditions that would grant Starlink a license. As a result, Dr. Chitambara is urging African countries to leverage their positions with equity in mind.
Make sure that it's actually a quid pro quo kind of arrangement where they also benefit from trade concessions, from greater investment inflows from American companies into their economies.
But while it may ease pressure on African governments in the short term, there could be repercussions in the long run.
It might happen that we please Trump after 4 years, but in the long run, we allow foreign interests that will have a more durable or a longer consequence on the African continent that will outlive Trump's presidency.
Several African countries, including Gambia, have so far delayed giving Musk's company an operating license, citing regulatory compliance. How much longer they can resist under mounting U.S. government pressure remains to be seen. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Right, well, to discuss our top story further, we're now joined by Sandile Swana, who's a political and governance analyst from Johannesburg, South Africa. Sandile, thank you very much for joining us. I'll begin by asking you this. Do you agree then that the Trump administration is probably using trade with Africa as a tool of coercion here?
The answer is definitely yes. Here in South Africa, there is coercion, there is intimidation of the leaders of the African National Congress, even in their personal capacity.
Right, and talking about Starlink, maybe what regulatory or legal hurdles has that company faced there in South Africa, and what would be the implications if Starlink was fully licensed to operate in the country?
Yes, the sector in which Starlink operates, which is the telecommunications sector, has got specific regulations as opposed to the general ICT sector. For instance, we have just recently had a big investment and the continuing investment from Amazon and Microsoft, IBM, and so on, American companies in the ICT sector, but not in the telecommunications sector. They had to comply with a different version of the regulations that are holding up Elon Musk company, which is Starlink. Those regulations can be changed so that they face the same regulations. That's not the problem. However, strategically, there are implications for South Africa in how we allow people to enter that space now.
Right. The allegation here is, of course, that African countries like South Africa that have resisted or delayed licensing Starlink have been met with veiled threats or some veiled threats there. Maybe talk to us about how African countries can be more strategic and make sure that it's a quid pro quo arrangement.
If we were to just stick to this case of telecommunications and ICT more generally, I think every African needs to be aware that cybersecurity is very important. Cyber warfare is very important. So you cannot allow people in the ICT space and foreign entities to enter that space recklessly. So the first thing to do is that you must have a master plan as to which parts of the country and which segments are going to be operated under which technology. So that strategy needs to be communicated. And then what are you offering to foreign investors? And what do you want from them? Long before anybody walks up to your doorstep. So right now, many of our African countries are being ambushed by Starlink and Donald Trump. In just this past 5 or so months, some of them have already admitted Starlink without any due process. And I have checked here in South Africa, there are many documents that have not been prepared at all. No audits of anything that has been done to prepare for the coming of any Starlink or any entity of that nature.
Right, and finally, Sandile, some countries like Kenya are reporting reduced speeds for Starlink as more subscribers come on board there. How can governments then ensure that the new service maybe improves on existing infrastructure and makes this, both the subscriber and governments the winners here?
You will have, you will know that over the years, let's say since the 1990s, we have developed potent African engineers in telecommunications, which means any technology that comes into the country, whether it's Kenya or South Africa, can be tested and evaluated ahead of time for its capacity. What we are now seeing is the inherent limitations of the technology itself in Kenya, because the other technologies, in many cases, and I'm talking to you on a satellite link, by the way, as I'm talking to you, I live in a rural area where I am. But you do need to then have terrestrial. In other words, you need terrestrial infrastructure to support that, which would include even fiber in certain areas and so on and so forth. So this is not a well thought out solution that Elon Musk has done. And lastly, African politicians must respect and use African engineers to evaluate any incoming technologies, and also use intelligence officers to evaluate the caliber of people they are bringing into the country.